I want to kick us off right now, though, with a guy who really is a good friend of mine. He and his family are prayer warriors for my wife. I've known him for a long time. I'm going to church with him on Sunday. He won't let me get out of it, so I have to go. He's my accountability group as well, so I can't wait for this guy to be in Congress. He's going to be a leader for conservatives, a fighter for conservatives, and he's going to be the guy whose staff is going to not want to work for him because he's going to know their jobs better than him, which is going to make him awesome. And he's also one of those guys where the Republican leaders are going to know they're going to have a guy who's not going to be intimidated by them. He's going to actually lead for conservatives. He is my friend and the future congressman from San Antonio to Austin, Chip Roy.
What's up, buddy?
Good morning.
How are you?
Good.
Good to see you.
So I told my wife that I am going to church with you on Sunday, and she informed me that your son has put her on the church prayer list, and every 3 weeks or so she gets a handwritten note from somebody in your church praying for her. So
That's good. Well, I think Charlie every Sunday keeps adding her to the list, so she might be getting those multiplying. She's going to be getting nonstop calls.
Probably so. Look, let me kick off with a question, and we've gotten this from several people, including Joshua, who's from here in Austin. Do you consider the provision of health care for veterans by the VA a core government function?
Well, taking a step back, I mean, the core function of our federal government, right? I mean, why it exists and why we came together as a country, these United States, right? When we were independent colonies and coming together, was to provide for the common defense, right? And that was the single core function of doing that. So there's no question that when we ask of the men and women in uniform who put their lives on the line and go out and defend the United States of America and abroad, that when they come home, they deserve the best health care that the world can possibly provide. I think that goes without saying. I think that the thing we need to do is make sure that we're giving our veterans even more options. And the problem with health care for our veterans is the same problem that civilians in the entire country has, is that we've got one-size-fits-all solutions without options and without flexibility and without market providing the kinds of low-cost, affordable options that you can get when you go out into the world and have actual competition. So we need to reform the healthcare system broadly, which will actually benefit our veterans the most.
I'm just, as a complete aside from that, I'm noticing that thus far, consistently, the entire 2 days now, I'm the only guy on the stage who hasn't worn boots. And yeah, I'm sorry. I've been realizing this, that I'm in Texas. I guess I need to go get a pair.
Well, these boots are, I think, now 22 years old, something like that. I mean,
they're authentic.
Yeah,
they're not the Beto O'Rourke special.
They've got a lot of miles. A lot of miles. A lot of dance floors, right, Kara? My wife's out here.
So let me ask you this. You've got a race here in Texas. It goes to the district from San Antonio to Austin, and it's one of those that a lot of liberals in the media say, oh, this is one that the Democrats could pick off. It's been consistently Republican for a while, and yet Democrats seem convinced that, and I wonder if it's a fundraising ploy for George Soros to convince him that they can one day win Texas.
Well, look, we take, first of all races we should take seriously and make sure that we win, and not just win by a little, but we win authoritatively, okay? We want to demonstrate that Texas is not just squeaking out being red, that we are leading the world in our beliefs, and that we have no chance that Democrats are going to get a foothold here. So that's the starting place, and that's true for both my former boss, Senator Cruz, in making sure that he beats Beto by a wide margin, but also that in races like mine, that we have a resounding victory in November. Look, I'll just tell you this, is that my opponent, not unlike most of the Democrats running, will try to occasionally sound centrist. But when you look at my opponent, and you know that he has publicly said that he would vote to impeach the president, he's publicly said that he opposed the tax bill that puts more money in the hands of working Texans and Americans, that he's for single-payer universal health care, that he's endorsed by Elizabeth Warren, that he's given money to Hillary Clinton. If that's a centrist, then, someone ought to be running in San Francisco, not in the 21st District of Texas, I can tell you that. So I think we will win if we have the resources. There's zero question that he's out of step with the people in this district. But like every district, we've got to have the resources. And I'm not here to make a fundraising pitch. This is about policy. But, if you want to visit chiproy.com, feel free.
Let's talk about policy. We're at $1 trillion deficit just for the year in Washington. That's been racked up by a lot of Republicans who, for the last 8 years, have blasted Barack Obama for out-of-control spending. How does this happen?
Well, it happens when people get in Washington and they get neck deep in the swamp and just start swimming instead of getting themselves out of the swamp. And I've seen it firsthand. I've had more experience in Washington than I care to have had, which is ironic given what I'm running for. But the reason I'm running, and Erick knows this, and many friends in the audience, and then some new faces here might not know that, I worked hard in Washington on the Senate Judiciary Committee. I came back to Texas, thought I was done, was working for Governor Rick Perry, and we were, fighting to protect Texas from the long arm of Washington, and I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I came out of the other end of that cancer-free, and thanks to the Lord and power of prayer and to a lot of free market medicine, I came out of that cancer-free, but with a renewed sense of obligation to save this republic for my children and for your children. And that's why I'm running. That's why I'm engaged to do this, and that's why I'm going back. We can save this republic if we actually focus on the money. I actually think it's the most important thing we can focus on. Now, it doesn't always, it's not always the first thing that you're going to poll, that's going to pop up on a poll. But if you think about the dollars, it's not just the $21 trillion of debt that we have. It's not that it's just over 100% of our GDP, all of which is unconscionable and weakening and damaging the United States abroad. It's also proxy for how much the federal government is engaged and involved in your life, right? It's proxy for all of the bureaucrats and all of the brokers in Washington telling you what your health care looks like, telling you what your education looks like. If you want to solve that problem, cut off the spigot. Strangle the money. Stop it. Stop the flow of the dollars. So for me, that's right. So for me, I think, the high point of the sort of Tea Party reaction to President Obama, right, was when we got through the cut, cap, and balance effort, we got a massive pushback on his $1.x trillion deficits, and we got it down to just $400 billion a year. But that was a great effort that started with the people. It started with the Tea Party. That all it resulted in getting pushing back on all that spending. And unfortunately, we've lost our way. We can get back to winning that if the people demand it. I'm telling you, that's the solution. If you demand it, these guys, frankly, for the most part, are cowards, and they'll run to the hills and they'll say, okay, fine, we'll stop spending. But you've got to demand it back home.
One of the most discouraging things about that was to see Republicans pass cut, cap, and balance, and then immediately have leadership start assailing the conservatives who forced them to do it. Oh, it was going to hurt defense. Oh, it was going to hurt this, that, and the other. And you guys let it happen. You were okay with it until it passed, and then to savage the Freedom Caucus members and whatnot for forcing their hand.
Well, and I'll take it a step further. President Trump, he gets up there and he hires one of the best guys in government, a guy named Russ Vought, as Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget. A lot of you all know him from Heritage Action, where he helped develop the Sentinel program. A strong warrior for conservatism, and he helped develop, along with Mr. Mulvaney, the director of OMB, a conservative budget that would balance in 5 years without touching entitlements per the president's request. Now, we need to talk about entitlements, and we need to reform entitlements and all that goes with that, and Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid. But they put forward a budget that balanced in 5 years. It was met literally with laughter and disregard from the quote-unquote leadership on Capitol Hill. They literally laughed it back down Pennsylvania Avenue and said, try again. Imagine that. The president comes in, he's elected from the American people who are frustrated with the ways of the swamp. And then Congress, they get a 5-year balanced budget, which they all campaign on, by the way. When they all campaign and say, well, we're going to pass a balanced budget amendment. Really? You've got the debt ceiling increase, stop every time that you have a vote on it. You can use to stop spending, but they won't use it, right? They've got the power to balance the budget, but they just laugh it away. Our job is to demand that they actually do it.
It seems like in that regard, one of the things you and I have talked about in the past is how Congress loves to abdicate its authority away to other groups, bureaucrats, the president, but also the courts. I mean, we've got a long history of Republican leaders passing legislation saying, we'll let the Supreme Court deal with this, so they don't have to. Complete abdication of their responsibilities, and yet now you see Republicans who are upset with the president on tariffs saying this is bad, but we're even not going to try to get this back, which we think is bad policy.
I mean, we could sit here and talk for hours on my personal experiences and watching Congress fumble away its Article I responsibility given to them by the founders. And that's really important, right? Most of the people in this room I know, love, respect, admire the Constitution and what our founders gave us. And they gave Article I to Congress for a reason, right? It was the first article. It was the power where the people are, the House of Representatives closest to the people, where the funding is supposed to start, et cetera. And I can just tell you from personal observation. I'll tell you one or two stories. Again, I could talk forever on it. When I had left and come back to Texas after I'd worked for Senator Cruz's chief of staff, I was working in the Attorney General's office here with Attorney General Ken Paxton, and we were challenging the president's DAPA program, right? The illegal executive amnesty. And we had won in the Southern District of Texas, and credit to Governor Abbott, he had started that as we came in, and we worked closely with his team. And we had won in the Southern District of Texas, and we were now in the Fifth Circuit. And we went up to meet with the Senate Republican caucus at their lunch. And we walked them through an update of here's where this stands, here's where the litigation stands. And we said, look, we hadn't drawn our panel yet. We didn't know if we'd get a good panel or a bad panel in terms of the 3-judge panel. And we said, guys, this is important. We may or may not win this. We're going to fight hard. We like our arguments. Of course, we ended up winning. But we were trying to tell them, that's right, it was good that we won. It was good to protect the Constitution. But we told, you guys have the job and the responsibility, just stop funding it. Like, stand up to the president and say, we're not going to do this. We're not going to fund this illegal, unconstitutional executive amnesty, which you don't have the power to do, President Obama. We're Congress. We represent the people. Nothing. Silence. Why? Because they could defer to the states, 25 states going to court to try to win in court. The other good example is, what did the Republicans do to challenge Obamacare? One of the things they did was to challenge the subsidies, right? The payments that were going to the insurance companies. And they said, well, this is unconstitutional and we need to win this. So they went to court and they filed suit. The House did, the Republican members of the House. Now what are they doing? They're in control. They could choose not to fund it, and they're actually looking to find a way to send those same subsidies to the insurers that they were going to court. Why? Because it was a good sounding as a talking point. It sounded good for them to go and say, I'm suing in court to stop Obamacare. But they didn't actually have to stand up and lead and say, we're going to talk about healthcare freedom. We're going to talk about making sure you can go to the doctors and the healthcare providers of your choice. We can make sure that you guys can have affordable healthcare because we're getting government out of the way. They don't want to stand up and lead on that. They want to talk about how, well, Obamacare is bad. We're going to let the judges do it.
So, I'm just the frustration that you've seen, and you and I have talked about this for so long. It breeds, I think, a cynicism in voters who they look at this and they realize these guys are saying things and they don't actually believe. Like, for example, defunding Planned Parenthood, where we had a couple of congressmen yesterday point out that the House of Representatives, they voted to defund Planned Parenthood, and the Senate wouldn't do anything. And I really wanted to ask, and I didn't because I didn't want to put him in an awkward position of how many of your colleagues would have still voted for it if they thought the Senate would have passed it. And there is this deep political cynicism that people, it's really turning people off to government. And I mean, what do you do about that?
Well, I actually think, and don't throw stones at me for saying this, I think we're winning. Okay? It doesn't seem like it, and there's a lot of things that aren't happening the way we in this room would like to see it happen, but I think we're winning. If you go back 10 years ago and you go, okay, let's put ourselves in 2008, and we were heading in an election where it didn't look real good, didn't turn out very good, it had the financial meltdown and so forth. And now you spin into 2009, Obama passes Obamacare, you've got trillion-dollar shovel-ready projects, whatever it was, spending our Chinese debt. And so here we sit, and what happens? The American people react. We have a Tea Party reaction. We push back on the spending. We force cut, cap, and balance. We get the spending down. We get Mike Lee instead of Bob Bennett in Utah. We get Rand Paul instead of Trey Grayson in Kentucky. We get Marco Rubio instead of Charlie Crist in Florida. We get Ted Cruz 2 years later in 2014 instead of David Dewhurst. We got the House Freedom Caucus born. We've got a group of warriors in the House that are fighting for us. We're just at the beginning of taking this back. But it all starts with the people. It starts with the people in this room, the other warriors in Texas, the people that are out there fighting hard across the country, to keep telling Washington, no, you don't get to do this. You don't get to spend away the inheritance that I'm going to pass down to my kids of this republic. You don't get to waste all the sacrifices made by those that fought in Normandy, who fought to preserve and protect this republic over the last 200-odd years. You don't get to do that. The people say that. I'm telling you, I was there when bricks got mailed in during the immigration fights in 06 and 07, again in 2013, and the American people spoke and said no to amnesty. And we've been holding the line on that, and I think the tide is turning. People are understanding what's happening with MS-13. They're understanding how bad it is when the cartels control our borders instead of the American people. They understand what's bad for the immigrants who are riding on the top of train cars, moms dying in the desert, kids getting sold into the sex slave business because we refuse to do our job to secure our borders. All true facts. We're winning this fight. We've just got to stay diligent and not grow tired. We're actually winning.
the bricks. You know, I'm someone who has actually organized an effort to mail balls to Mitch McConnell. We sent, I did, true story, sent rock salt to Olympia Snow when she was thinking of wobbling on Obamacare. I'm wondering if we need to start sending bricks again. This wall thing, you know, I'm a little squishy on the immigration issue, a little bit. But I want like a big ass wall with a moat along our southern border. It seems like a no-brainer to me, particularly in light of a story last week that the media did everything possible to ignore of Jordanian citizen living in Mexico smuggling Yemeni nationals into this country over the border. Thank God they were caught. It seems like it should be a no-brainer to build a wall on the border, to secure our border in some way. Maybe technology can do it. Rick Perry's solution has always been more technical solution than a physical wall, but you can't get Republicans in Congress to agree to build a wall.
The wall is very simply the demand by the American people to see actual action by their government to secure our border and defend our sovereignty. That's what it is. It is proxy for actual security instead of just words. Do we need a border from the Gulf of Mexico all the way across to San Diego? A wall, I mean. Perhaps. Let's have a conversation about Big Bend. But you know what I always say? If you can show me the wall from the Gulf of Mexico to Big Bend and it's working, well, let's talk about the difficulty of the terrain in Big Bend. But these guys don't want to have any of that conversation. I remember one prominent politician when I was in the Senate Judiciary Committee who referred to the fence and the wall as a 19th century solution to a 21st century problem. And I said to this politician, I said, you know, so you mean we should just take the fences down from around the White House? You mean ranchers should just drop their fences so their, you know, livestock can run loose? You know, suddenly fences, you know, don't work in the 21st century. And he's kind of got a scowl and so forth. And the same politicians making those arguments were looking at the fences in San Diego when they were added and built and the triple layer fences were added. And you saw apprehensions in the Southern California area drop from 600,000+ to 60,000. And then they said, those who said that the fencing didn't work said, yeah, see, they just go around the fence and they go to New Mexico and Arizona and Texas. And you literally, you face palm and you go, right, so that's the fence is not working. But let's talk for a minute, though, about Texas, right? We have a long, rich history with our neighbor to the south in Mexico. We understand in Texas what it means to live peaceably with our southern neighbors, and we have families, grandparents, great-grandparents who have come across and walked across the border. You know, my dad, he grew up in West Texas, and they'd go down, they'd go into Mexico, and they have buddies, and they talk about people whose grandparents would be across the border and come across. Nobody, I think, in this room, as conservative an audience as this, who I'm quite confident, like me, wants hardcore border security, doesn't think we need a solution that allows for appropriate travel to and from across the border according to our laws. And that's the problem. We get painted into the corner as being the bad guys who, well, we want to just shut the border down. We want actual solutions to the problem. And by the way, not just for our own sovereignty and well-being, but like I said a second ago, for the very immigrants that in the false name of compassion, these people stand up and use open borders as their way to seem like they've got a great big heart, when in fact, that is causing the crisis. That is causing these children to get sold into a horrible, horrible sex slave industry. That is causing moms to die in the desert. That is causing the problem at the border. It's empowering the cartels, empowering the illegal interests at the border because we fail to do our job. We have an obligation to stand up and defend the borders of the United States.
You're pretty good at this.
You know what? If you actually say what you believe, it's funny how people might actually respond to it instead of trying to sugarcoat it in sort of talking points from D.C. So.
You know, you say that, and there is this phenomenon now in the country where everybody thinks you've got to be on a specific team, and you can really tell the guys who think, I got to be on this team, but I'm not really there, so they're speaking the language as if they got Rosetta Stone. And it's real separation these days among real conservatives and those who pretend. I mean, you've got this problem in Texas where it's such a Republican state, all the Democrats run with an R next to their name, even though they're Democrats. And you got to find some good conservative discernment to weed those people out.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, this goes back to what I was saying before, that I've observed over time is you've got to have these crystallized moments where there's a choice on an issue that matters. And then, you'll separate the wheat from the chaff. I mean, you'll know, right? You'll see what happens. We saw it unfold a little bit on the recent immigration debate, not to just focus on immigration, but it was a very recent vote. We saw what happened when, unfortunately, Leadership was trying to decide what they were going to do, and they put forward 2 bills to have 2 votes. Instead of working, putting a bill on the floor, having the amendments, have debates on the amendments, have a full robust discussion, message to the American people what they were trying to do along the lines like I was just talking about, pro-immigration, pro-business, pro-national security, pro-sovereignty, right? There was everything we could do. We could message it, and it would be wildly popular. And instead, they chose to put 2 bills on the floor with mushy messaging that nobody understood what was going on. And guess what? The bill that was the better bill, what they call Good Lat 1, right? It was a bill that had actual good security. It actually had status for the DACA kids, but it was non-citizenship status. And then it had reformed our immigration system for points and so forth. But it was a good bill, but it was a good compromise bill. Some of the Freedom Caucus guys were kind of holding their nose and saying, well, this goes farther than I would prefer, but let's get it done. Let's do it for the country. But no. What had to happen? Let's put forward another bill that's softer, that's weaker on security, that grants citizenship. And what happened? That bill got 121 votes. The good bill got 196 votes, only 22 votes shy of needing the votes to get through the House. What if they had whipped that bill? What if they had messaged that bill? What if they had pushed that bill? What if they'd asked the president to get behind that bill instead of them asking the president to get behind the bad bill? Imagine what we would have been able to accomplish. We could have gotten that done. We could have stood up and done something good for the country and sent it to the Senate and forced them to act. That's what happens up in Washington. And you could see in the dividing lines who the good guys were wanting to try to fight for the right things for the country.
Tried not to laugh when you said force the Senate to act. How exactly do you force the Senate to act?
I believe that you force these guys to act, not by all of this stuff getting lost in the arcane rules of the Senate and what you're going to do and filibusters and reforms and all that stuff. Force them to act by demanding them to do the things we demand them to do. Tell them what they have to do. In 2007, when amnesty was full-throated running down the tracks, we had a week recess in July, and the senators went back home, and there were town halls and forums back in their districts, and I was sitting in the room, and President Bush came down, and everybody was sitting there, and they're like, we got to pass this thing when we came back from the recess. And Senators Saxby and Chambliss, Senators Chambliss and Isaacson from Georgia stood up and said, Mr. President, I'm sorry, we love you, but we can't be with you on this, because we were just back home in Georgia all week getting our rear ends chewed out by the people of Georgia, because this is an amnesty bill, and we can't be with you. And it killed the bill. Now, why do I say that? The people demanded that they do, in that case, not do what they were trying to do. We need to just tell the Senate, we demand that they actually do what they said they were going to do and repeal Obamacare, but more importantly, give us health care freedom. Get the federal government out of the way. We demand it. That's it. When we do that, we win. Now, look, we can have debates inside D.C. and talk about filibuster rules, and we can talk about what we need to do on votes, reconciliation, all these things. Just do it. They're all excuses. These are all barriers for them to hide behind. It's not the rules. That's not the problem. The problem is they don't have the will to stand up and fight for healthcare freedom. They want to get up and talk about pre-existing conditions. They want to get up and talk about giving insurance to everybody. They're playing on the liberals' playing field. They're playing on their field about what government can do for you, right? The opposite of John Kennedy's words, right? I mean, that's where our caucus is, right? To the left of John Kennedy in terms of what the government should be doing for you versus what you should be doing for yourselves. And that's where we win, is if we get them to say, is to listen to us and we demand that they actually do it.
We've got about 7 minutes left.
Okay.
This crowd is slightly less than half of it is from Texas. We've got people from California, from Georgia, Louisiana.
California?
There is a Vermonter in here somewhere, one Vermonter. I tried to smell the cheese, and you can't find who the Vermont person is. No. I know there are Wisconsin and Minnesota are here, Floridians, Carolinians, Virginians. What do people not in your district do to help you?
Well, one is just get out and get engaged and make sure that we know that there isn't a blue wave, but rather that we are going to prove everybody wrong by having an extraordinary showing this fall, so that Congress can finally do what it said it would do all these years, and get behind the president and send bills to the president's desk that he can sign without holding his nose, right? We don't need to send $1 trillion spending bill like they sent in February on the backs of our men and women in uniform, so the president felt like he had to sign it so that we could give them the tools they need. Send a responsible bill to the president. Send a bill that would give us our health care freedom. Send us a security bill across the president's desk. If the people in this room get engaged and get engaged throughout the country, we can win this fight. And the other thing I would say to our friends who are not from Texas is we will unite as a country if we remember that we can agree to disagree state by state the way our founders meant for us to be able to do it. If we want to reunite this great country, then we need to let California be California, let Texas be Texas, let Florida, Minnesota, Georgia, Massachusetts be what we're going to be so we can decide at our levels in our communities how we want to live. That is the most important thing we can do to preserve and protect our freedom. So, go back and fight for the conservative values you believe in your state, but also remember that your state is unique and you can figure out how to make it work for the people in your community. And we have to remember that conservatism, which has everything in the world to do with self-reliance and personal responsibility and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, the rugged individualism that made Texas great, all of those things. But it also has everything in the world to do with community, right? Community for us is that sense of making sure we're caring for our neighbors and our families down the street and not looking to a faraway government to do it. When people fall down on their luck, help them when they're next door to you. Figure out how to get engaged in the community and have good rules and good policies and good charities and good engagement so that we care for one another rather than looking to Washington to have some one-size-fits-all program that's resulting in $21 trillion of debt and climbing. That's how we win this fight.
Good answer there. I was really expecting you were going to say move to Texas, but...
Well, for the folks in this room, move to Texas. For some others, you should think twice. Let
California be California.
That's right.
Chip Roy, thank you very much for sitting down with us, and good luck on the campaign.
And I just want to say something about Erick Erickson and what he's meant for conservatism. This guy's done so much to help advance the narrative for conservatism over the last 15 plus years. The Resurgent is a great entity and organization that he's working for. His talk radio show is fantastic. This is a great event that he and Drew Ryan and others that have been working on this have put together. A round of applause for Erick Erickson for all he does for conservatism.
Thank you. Thanks, man.
Appreciate it.
See you tomorrow.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.